The Wright Brothers, Lesson 10, Chapter 7, The First Practical Airplane, page 81 to page 87. So, as I'm reading today, remember that we are pretending to be one of the Wright brothers. Think about how we might have felt after flying our newest airplane. After receiving his son's telegram, Bishop Wright made a statement to the press. Wilbur is 36, Orville 32, and they are as inseparable as twins. For several years, they have read up on aeronautics as a physician would read in his books, and they have studied, discussed, and experimented together. Natural workmen. They have invented, constructed, and operated their gliders, and finally, the Wright Flyer jointly, all their personal expense. About equal credit is due each. So, do you agree with your father's statement about equal credit is due each? Why or why not? Talk it over with your partner. Once back home in Dayton, the brothers issued a press statement of their own. As winter was already well set in, we should have postponed our trials to a more favorable season. But we were determined, before returning home, to know whether the machine possessed sufficient power to fly, sufficient strength to withstand the shock of landings, and sufficient capacity of control to make flight safe in boisterous winds, as well as in calm air. When these points had been definitely established, we at once packed our goods and returned home, knowing that the age of the flying machine had come at last. Before their flyer could be considered a practical invention, the Wrights had to prove that it was capable of more than brief straight-line flights. That winter, they built a new flyer with a stronger body and a more powerful motor. They wanted a flying field closer to home, where they could spend more time testing the machine. Why is it necessary to build another flyer? A friend offered the use of the Huffman Prairie, the 100-acre cow pasture on the outskirts of Dayton. The brothers immediately set to work on their airfields. First, they cut all the tall grass with scissors. Then they built a wooden shed in the corner of a meadow, where they assembled their Flyer 2 in the spring of 1904. So, we're going to work on summarizing for the next 4 paragraphs. So, the Huffman Prairie was not as easy to use as the flying ground of Kitty Hawk had been. There's a lot of trees that blocked the winds that they needed, and the ground is covered with grassy mountains. And there's cows and horses that had to move out of the way whenever they wanted to fly. They had to deal with the issue of the winds. The brothers built a launching system to help the plane move along the track no matter the wind speed. However, this does not solve the problem of control. They were able to make about 80 short flights in this new plane at Huffman Prairie, but many of them were not successful, and numerous repairs were necessary. So we're going to just skip down now to the last paragraph here. With practice, their flights grew longer and more reliable. By the end of August, they were making flights of about a quarter of a mile, as far as they could travel in a straight line without crossing the barbed wire fence separating the Huffman Prairie from Farmer Stauffer's cornfield. On September 15th, Wilbur made his first turn in the air. On September 20th, he flew his first complete circle in the air, the flight witnessed by Amos Root. says, when the weight dropped from the top of the derrick, the flyer was catapulted along the starting track with enough speed for liftoff. So I remember reading that they had assembled their flyer too in the spring, that they built it to try to prove that they could fly in patterns other than straight lines. But it took until September to turn and fly in a circle. So, as we learned previously, they were determined. This photograph here. Wilbur and Orville with their 1904 flyer beside the hangar at Huffman Prairie. The longest flight made by his machine lasted 5 minutes. Okay. After that, the brothers repeatedly flew complete circles. On November 9th, in their longest flight of 1904, Wilbur circled Huffman Prairie 4 times in 5 minutes. Altogether, the Wrights were airborne for about 45 minutes that year. Their flying practice was often interrupted by foul weather, and even when conditions were ideal, flight tests involved plenty of hard physical work. The flyer had to be removed sideways from its shed so that the tail-forward elevator could be bolted on. 60 feet of track had to be laid and staked into place, and the 1,600-pound weight hoisted to the top of the starting derrick. After each flight, the 700-pound machine had to be lifted on wheeled supports and hauled back to the starting track across the bumpy meadow. So, why do they have to use a support with wheels to move the plane back to the starting track? An electronic trolley ran past Huffman Prairie, and the two brothers rode it back and forth between the flying field and Dayton. I sort of felt sorry for them, recalled a fellow passenger, Luther Beard. They seemed like well-meaning, decent young men. Yet there they were, neglecting their businesses to waste their time day after day on that ridiculous flying machine. I had an idea that they must worry their father. Why do you think the man thinks that they were wasting their time? Talk to your partner. In the spring of 1905, the brothers completed Flyer 3, an improved model of their powered aircrafts. So, why do you think they built another airplane now? The most important change was the control system. In the earlier Flyers, the tail rudder was linked to the wing warping system. As a result of their flight experiences, the brothers decided to separate the rudder and warp controls. The pilot's hips remained at the wing warping cradle, while his hands rested on 2 levers, one for the elevator in front of the plane and the other for the rudder at the rear. This made the controls more sensitive to the pilot's commands. That year, the Wrights completed more than 40 successful flights, spending over just 5 hours in the air. On October 5th, Wilbur set a new endurance record when he circled the field 30 times in 39 minutes, covering a distance of 24.5 miles. So, I like to link details together. So I remember reading that in 1904, they had only spent 45 minutes in the air with the Flyer 2. Now with this Flyer 3, a year later, they recorded 5 hours of flying time. So that's a huge improvement. These flights demonstrated that the Wright Flyer 3 was the world's first truly practical airplane. It could stay safely in the air as long as the fuel supply lasted. It could bank, turn, circle, and perform figure eights with ease and grace. And it was sturdy enough to withstand repeated takeoffs and landings. Wilbur told a friend, "Our 1905 improvements have given us such results as to justify the assertion that flying has been transformed from the realm of scientific problems to that of useful arts. I'm going to read that quote again. What do you think he means when he said useful arts? Our 1905 improvements have given such results as to justify that assertion that flying has been transformed from the realm of scientific problems to that of useful arts. Says the 1905 Flyer, considered the world's first truly practical airplane, it set a new endurance record by staying aloft for nearly 39 minutes. Even so, people weren't easily convinced that the age of flight had arrived. Newspaper accounts of the Wrights' first flights at Kitty Hawk had been wildly exaggerated. To help clear the air, the brothers had invited local reporters to watch the first test flights of Flyer 2 back in May 1904. Twice that month, reporters had trooped out to Huffman Prairie, and both times the Flyer's engines had failed before it could lift off. The reporters left and didn't come back. Wilbur and Orville carried out their flight tests with only a few friends and neighbors as witnesses. By the autumn of 1905, however, word was getting around that the strange wing contraption was circling noisily in the sky above Huffman Prairie. Newspapers in Dayton and Cincinnati began to carry stories about the flights, and yet the news did not go out over the wires. The rest of the world paid little attention to the historic event taking place in the Ohio cow pasture. People found it hard to believe in airplanes. Understandably so, as Orville stated plainly years later. I think it was mainly due to the fact that human flight was generally looked upon as an impossibility, and that scarcely anyone believed in it until he actually saw it with his own eyes. So, why do you think no one really paid attention to their flights? And why do you think people needed to see the airplane for themselves before they could actually believe it was possible? Remember, there's no TVs, no radios, movies, no internet, or social media back then.